Newton News' Owen Bynum went out during Election Day to hear what residents thought about the biggest issues Newton is facing, as well as their thoughts on the Village Center Overlay District.
It's voting day here in the city of Newton. I'm going around asking residents what are some of the problems and issues that the city is currently facing.
You know, I think we've had a number of city councilors in for a number of years, and maybe it's time for some new folks to come in. I'm very concerned about the zoning proposals that have come out of zoning and planning. I'm an architect myself, and I'm not seeing the kind of process that would allow us to be very confident that we've come to a consensus on this issue and that we have a good zoning that would match that consensus.
Every community on the earth is facing climate crisis, and we've been doing a lot of great work in the last 2 years on improving our energy codes and reducing our greenhouse gases. And lastly, one that's really near and dear to my heart is making our community more walkable and bikeable, putting in more things like this that you see right here, this RRFB, which is a rectangular rapid flashing beacon, makes it safer for pedestrians, but also moving forward on bike infrastructure and safer sidewalks.
I think overnight parking seems to be a pretty hot issue these days, and it could be solved by banning that practice of prohibiting overnight parking.
It looks like our schools are a little bit in a slight decline. I heard that the academic rigor is a little bit down, so I think that's a major issue that's facing the community. I think it's really important to focus on the future, and I think education is a huge component, especially as a Newton resident with small children. So, obviously there's current issues that affect us, but that's something that we can't overlook.
There are many, but the two are housing and our Village Center zoning plan that is intended to address our housing need and add more diverse housing opportunity into our village centers and immediately surrounding neighborhoods, and our schools. Our schools are suffering a lack of resources, and we were not able to pass an override this past spring, which hurt our ability to provide enough teachers and enough support services for our students. And we must find a way to bring more revenue into our schools. These two things are interconnected in that our housing crisis is preventing a next generation from getting a foothold in Newton, which is really critical both in terms of filling our schools, which are seeing depleted enrollments steadily over the last 5 years, and teachers can't afford to live here. 11% of our city workers live actually in Newton, 89% scattering to the winds, and it's because the housing prices are so precious here. So we've got to do something about this. We need a next generation of civic leaders to take over our community as well.
I think the biggest issue in this election is the question of the zoning and development. And I think the way to fix it is to stop listening to what developers whose only interest is profit have to say and figure out how to fix the housing shortage without enriching a handful of already wealthy developers.
When going around asking Newton residents about the Village Center Overlay District and the MBTA community laws, this is what they had to say.
I am totally in support of the overlay district plan. I think it's the way to get smart growth, and we've got to do it for Newton. That's just my feeling.
Well, I don't like the idea that we need more housing here, because we don't. We're going to end up like Watertown with a high population density. So I'm definitely opposed to development.
I welcome the MBTA new Commuter Center Act because I think it's going to help our communities see that we need more housing and that housing needs to be diverse to help our workforce, to help our young families, to help people come back to our community.
Personally, having studied the MBTA Communities Act fairly closely and trying to determine its origins and its methodology. It's quite dense, and that's the most dense thing about it, is that it's almost impossible to tell how they came up with those broad numbers and those projections. And now all that data is like a decade old. It's based on commuting patterns that have changed since COVID. So the whole thing doesn't make that much sense anymore. And I wish the state and localities would get together and figure out something more sensible than one size fits all as a formula for 174 different communities that have different geographies, different demographics, different infrastructure. It made no sense, but that's what they came up with, and so that's what we're trying to deal with now.
Newton is facing a number of issues. One we've certainly heard a lot about is the need to address our housing crisis, and we've been doing a lot of work in the last 2 years on village center zoning to help address that and to support our businesses.
The more people, the more potentially the tax rate will go up. So that's potentially good for the homeowners.
All this other zoning is very upsetting, because Upper Falls is not in that MBTA mandate. Upper Falls is about a mile away from the T, so we shouldn't even be involved in it, the village of Upper Falls. We just got accepted 800 units in Northland, and then across the street there's going to be another 400. So that's 1,200 units that are going to be in Upper Falls. So I mean, what's the rush? I'm definitely against it. I mean, my vote, the reason I'm voting for Rainer, I know she understands it and she's against it. So my vote this time was against anybody that wanted the change for the zoning. And then all these buildings are going to let by right, and only have a half a parking space for each unit. I mean, that's outrageous. I mean, Newton, you might as well write it off, as far as I'm concerned. It's terrible what's happening to this city. It's not going to affect me because I'm an old guy, but, you know, I'm just thinking of what, I grew up here my whole life. I've been here my whole life. And Newton has changed, not for the better, I don't think. All this building. People come to Newton because it has open. You have a yard, you have a playground you can go to, but they're building houses now that 90% of the land is covered by building.
I mean, zoning. So,
would you like to elaborate a little bit on those?
No, we've got the city, so we have the MBTA Communities Act, which is mandated by the state that we have 8,300 plus new housing units in the city of 30,000 units, right? So that gives us a 25% increase. The city, on top of that, is proposing another 5,000 to 10,000. And what most of the people are saying here is, we want to go along with the MBTA Communities Act. We want more housing in Newton. Let's do the 8,300 and pause it and see what effect that has on our traffic, on our schools, on our infrastructure. And then, you know, if we're not seeing so much, sorry, about to get run over. If that, you know, if we're not so negatively affected, then we could do more.